Thanks. So, I know the only member of the public that we really heard from was Velma, but it sounds like she was of the sentiment that uni's kind of jump off point. She was in agreement that it is a good place to start. And I think as staff, it would be helpful to kind of like get more details on how to develop the framework. And I know that we are relying heavily on Colorado and VirusScreen to kind of establish some of those measurements. And so, Ronnie, I know that you mentioned that maybe it would be helpful to get a little bit more clarity. I don't know if we want to continue the conversation there and, try to hash this out a little bit more.
Well, I would just ask, I know I haven't been in all the task force conversations. So I think I'm thinking directly about like the cumulative analysis cumulative impact analyses. And I think I really stand by the fact with all of uni's points that metrics and having these goals related to environmental justice are very important. And since this is sort of the end of the task force, I also hear Robin's point of, that's a lot to the causation parts and just sort of, this is a big framework conversation. So I'm trying to figure out what would be useful to provide given the time frame, and maybe it's try to segment it into a place where we could start with the task force and have broader goals at the end, because I think that even looking at the CEQ's framework, I don't know if I could come up, or the team could come up with as sound of a framework, that it just takes a lot more stakeholders to get to that point where I'm sort of at. I'm just trying to figure out what would be useful and what could the task force actually have set up that would kind of meet all those stakeholders' needs for a broader framework.
I think, when I first started talking about this, I did say that whatever it is, it needs public input. I don't think I can sit here and be very prescriptive and say, okay, you need to go to the NHANES data set and look and see, lead levels and see are the lead levels improving over time in these communities as an example. And I could be really prescriptive and give a list of potential indicators that are of importance. That's from my perspective as a public health person. I'd want to know is the food desert issues changing, things like that. And so that's why I feel the process of identifying these indicators has to pull in a lot of different people than just us. And I don't think, so from my perspective, the recommendation would be, since this is a long-term performance indicator, so we don't really need really specific things by the end of the year. But my recommendation to whatever entity or to the state or to the CDPHE is, these are things that you need to be thinking about, and these are some of the areas that that you could potentially consider. I don't want this to be we're developing a rule for you, you have to do this, but just give you enough recommendations to say, go look at what the CDC has done in terms of the community health assessment. Consider CJUST, which is a CEQ tool. Consider your tool and think about things that are meaningful to the community. Capture those and then put it back out to the community for some kind of input or feedback. Because I feel like this is almost like your capstone for your program. That it makes sure that it represents the different efforts that you're trying to change, the different needles that you're trying to move, and then showing it to the community or to the state or to whoever, these are the needles that we have moved, So that's putting on my public health hat, and then putting on my industry hat. From an industry perspective, I think the efforts can be useful in the sense that it could potentially not in a causal manner, but start reflecting the changes in the practices that the industry is doing. You know what I mean? because it may be able to capture some of those different aspects of whether it's the social programs that the industry is engaging in, or whether it's dealing with the emissions piece of it. You may be able to capture that in the long run. So it's like I said, it's a capstone for me. That's the way I look at it. And
Yeah,
I don't, yeah.
Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to add that that's very helpful, because I think that a metric, as we're trying to create a project plan for EnviroScreen, or we're creating a project plan for EnviroScreen, is where and how is the data being used, because it's already being used in a lot of agencies and a lot of places. And so that's something I'm already planned on trying to capture, but this sort of framework to like have it be very transparent, and then the eventual, well, we know this is how we used EnviroScreen to look at inspections for water quality facilities. And then in 5 to 10 years, we can see what does that look like. And maybe we can't point to causation, but getting that baseline data of where and how it's being used is really important.
Can I pose a question? Oh, sorry, Lubna. If it's okay, Uni, Sheila, Michael, Kelly, I wonder if we can pose a question to you related to Ronnie's last point, which is timeline. So, as your staff, as we develop these kind of more fleshed out versions of this conversation for you to consider, I think, as with all the recommendations, we want to consider like, what is the timeline for implementation? And I think I'm hearing that there's somewhat of a longer term time horizon. This isn't like by this time next year, this dashboard needs to be live, but I'm curious if there are timelines that you're envisioning, if there are maybe multiple timelines for something like a baseline or launching the project versus like using the dashboard. Do you have thoughts to guide us there?
I think, as a regulated utility, we file all the time to the PUC. And we think about the Environmental Justice Act, and you think about other legislation that has come out of the 2021 General Assembly. I think timelines should kind of be somewhat in sync with some of the legislative directives that have come out of the General Assembly, whether it's around clean heat standards, environmental justice. You heard Robin talk about some of the air toxins that certain industries have to report on. And so if there was like a way to kind of sync in our recommendations with those legislative timelines, I think that would help. And then I also think that would help the community as well, as I think there's a big, focus on gas, right? And in our communities and other, environmental harms that we've been talking about since we started this conversation back in December. Would be my suggestion.
Thanks, Michael.
And not to make you and Joel and everyone's work harder. I just think it would help all parties involved.
Thanks, Michael. And just want to, again, convey our apologies to just task force members just joining. I know there was confusion around the link, the Zoom link, which we didn't foresee, but we will make sure it does not happen again in the future. But for those just joining, we are discussing that third objective in the agenda about establishing measurable goals. Ian, welcome. And so we're kind of hashing out like a game plan for how we want to proceed in developing those recommendations. All right, so
could you place the agenda link in the chat for me since I just joined, please? And also, hello everyone.
Morning, Ian. Welcome to the call.
I'm going to share another link of another document just to confuse everybody. But let me see if we get this here. This is the Healthy People document. I'm not sure if it's another document that the state puts out, the state is required to put out, but it also has like indicators. And so, you know, the idea that there are just so many different things that from a health perspective that people look at, that's why I feel very strongly this needs to go back to the people and have them identify, you know, what it is that's important to them. Yeah, because I still remember, I think it was during one of our first meetings, we had a member of the public who spoke to us and said that, you know, she shows up for the meetings and you know, expresses, you know, her concerns, and everybody asks her, you know, where's the data? And so kind of capturing what she said back then was, you know, what information does she feel that she needs to be able to tell her story or to be able to counter whatever it is somebody else is saying to her. Yeah. Go ahead, Shayla.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I worked on one of the first Healthy People progress reviews 20 years ago. And the process, I consider a report card. Some people think of it as a public health improvement plan. I think it's both, but it has evolved over 20 years, and it has moved from thinking of health as something that happens within the walls of healthcare systems and public health departments to a much more expansive sort of understanding of health. You know, that includes environmental justice, environmental racism, you know, systems of oppression, housing, et cetera, the conversation that we've been having. And so now the indicators reflect that moving from downstream to upstream. And so to Uni's point, which I agree with, I think that we need public input on this. And to address your question, Uni, my office is in the process of publishing a report similar to the Healthy People report. And we also, CDPHE also published a public health improvement plan, which has recommendations, goals, and objectives. I encourage everybody to read it. It's well written. But so the public really needs to weigh in on these indicators. It can't just be public health people or environmental scientists, et cetera. And I think that was a weakness of the early Healthy People work, the work of the Healthy People reports, and they still could do a better job of that. So.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's why I keep saying, I know my vision is narrowed because of my public health background, but I think the point is that they're very different. There are models out there that we could use. And so I think one of the questions that we need to think about if we'll get Ian into the conversation is, do we consider like a standalone report, or is it just making sure all these different considerations are woven into the different agencies and their reports that they report out? I don't know how often they do it. And if Robin's here to talk about the air division and what they do. And so can it be a standalone, or is it just something that we have to like weave into the different agencies and what information they're sharing?
Ian has his hand up.
Well, the thing I was going to suggest isn't exactly along the same lines of weaving it in, which I think that's a good idea. One of the ideas that I think about eliminating health disparities has to do with enforcement, and in particular, CDPHE's role in enforcement. I know that they've signed an MOU to increase enforcement in North Denver. I personally released a report earlier this year, showed 189 violations in 4 square miles. I know that is replicated in other parts of the state, and even Representative DeGette's bringing forward like an under enforcement bill at the national level of trying to document where enforcement issues occur, and then mandating over a series of years to bring the people who are the violators into compliance over a period of time. And I feel like that is a way in which you can begin to chip away at health disparities by removing the violations and the emissions into communities.
Thank you, Ian. And before you joined, we'd been having a conversation that the next step in this discussion is that we as staff will take the feedback that we've heard today and ideas from task force members and some members of the public who spoke earlier, to kind of flesh out UNI's framework into a more detailed recommendation. And so I think that your point there is really valuable, and I think that is something we absolutely can do. You mentioned the memorandum of understanding on environmental justice and enforcement, and we are developing a work plan for how we're actually going to implement that agreement, which stay tuned. There should be an announcement in the very near future about that work plan and an opportunity for comment on it. But it established lots of metrics and goals and things that we can quantify around how we are prioritizing enforcement in our disproportionately impacted communities. And I think we could absolutely work data that we collect through that process to kind of show our progress on enforcement into sort of whatever broader dashboard or measurement tool that we're talking about here. So that's great feedback. And just wanted to say that is very doable.
Okay, I appreciate that. So I see one side of it as enforcement, and then I also see another side of eliminating health disparities is like elevating health in decision making, whether you're talking about planning, let's say a road project, or if you're talking about permitting of emissions from a place, right? Like the more that we continue to allow emissions to grow and we don't elevate and put health and safety first, like we've tried to do in COGCC, I think you're going to continue to see that as well. So there's like an enforcement side, but also if you're granting permits and things that continue to allow emissions to increase, or you widen roads that allow emissions to increase, that you're going to continue to see health disparities increase because they're directly connected to the emissions that are being created. And so I think that we got to stop it and we have to enforce what's being legally allowed.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And I know this is not the first time that you've kind of shared that, like, you know, zooming out and really focusing on the big picture issues. And I hope that's pretty well reflected in the draft recommendations. So I think we have what we need to proceed. We have about 20 minutes left in this meeting. I don't know that, I think we have some pretty clear next steps, right? We have UNI's framework, which is at the bottom of that agenda, that I think us as staff, and especially with, Ronnie here working specifically on Colorado and virus screen. And while, yes, it is like, there are so many different audiences and metrics and data sets that we can use. I think we can, as staff, kind of come up with a really feasible and implementable game plan for how we will establish some of these metrics. I think it's helpful, Robin, some of the things that you brought up earlier in terms of like actual implementation and the who is doing what. I think that's something that us as staff can think about, and maybe we can talk with you about that in more detail in terms of what's realistic. But I think we have what we need to kind of develop this kind of measurable goals, recommendations a little bit further. Once we flesh that out, we can share that amongst the full task force and include it as another section in the data recommendations. And I think, to many people's points about like, we need public input, we need, folks to tell us what they think about this. I mean, that's how we proceed with our public comment period, right? So I think we can share this out and maybe highlight it as like, hey, this section is new, and, boost that up, especially at our October meeting. I think we talked about all of the other data recommendations. We gained pretty good consensus around all those other data recommendations. This is like the glaringly missing piece. And so I think us hashing that out and sending out a draft of that and talking about it in more detail at the October meeting and giving people the opportunity to provide public comment on this section, on this new section, as well as provide written public comment. I think that is probably where we'll go and where I'm seeing next steps. But I welcome, members of the task force, if you feel like you want to express something else or, anything additional that needs to be discussed regarding establishing measurable goals. I welcome that right now. And Uni, is, the chair of this subcommittee, how do you feel about that? Like, do you agree? Do you think that we're in a good place? How do you feel about those next steps?
No, I think we're in a good place. I think, we've listened to the public, we've listened to, folks from different agencies and expressed concerns. I think we're in a good place to, for you guys to continue excellent work in putting all this in writing and keeping up our reputation of not having a lot of feedback on our comments. So I think we're good. So I support ending this meeting. So is that kind of what you were?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, you as task force members feel, because I know that we've kind of collected the notes. We have the meeting recordings. I know that the notes are available on the public drive, then maybe don't look at them yet because we have a lot of gaps to fill because we were dealing with a lot of technical issues on the back end. But I think we have what we need in terms of, like, we actually had a pretty robust discussion today about, what needs to be included in all the considerations in establishing measurable goals. So I think, we have our homework cut out for us, and we can work on this assignment between now and the October meeting. Hopefully sooner. We'll try to get something out to you all to kind of show what we've worked on.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. I will just pause for a second to see if, Sheila, Robin, Ian, Kelly, if there's anything else that you'd like to share.
No, again, just really appreciate the discussion today and really appreciate you, Uni, for taking point on all of this.
Yes. And, I will say, I think some of this stuff really comes naturally to you, Uni, in terms of like kind of thinking about how to develop such frameworks. And, while I know that this is just something that came out of your brain during the August meeting, of like a sense of like, this is like this missing piece. I think, just to give people like a really like bird's eye view, I think in terms of addressing all of the things that were written in the statute that this task force needs to accomplish, and us breaking it out into the subcommittee and looking at kind of guidelines that we can provide in terms of recommendations. Overall, I think we are in a really great place. We are just in this stage of like really polishing things and continuing to make sure that we're getting meaningful input. So with that said, we will go ahead and close out the meeting. I mentioned this earlier, but I will be sending out a communications toolkit to the full task force. This is a toolkit that encourages people to continue providing public comment. We have been receiving some written public comments, and we've been receiving some responses to the survey that we put out to give people an opportunity to provide feedback on the recommendations in a way that isn't just like track changes or writing us an email. The survey is a little bit more streamlined, but we would love to continue to boost public participation in providing that feedback. Folks have until October 14th. That comms toolkit that I'm going to be setting out is for you all task force members. So this is a matter of kind of copy pasting some of the comms materials that we've already written out and putting it on your LinkedIn or Facebook, or however you, or if you have a listserv that you're on where you feel like you're going to be well connected to community members that way, please do encourage folks to provide public comment on the recommendations. This is all of your task force members' hard work over the past few months. We are wrapping up, we have less than 2 months before the deadline to submit these recommendations, and just really want to make sure that this final 45-day public comment period is really robust. So yeah, thanks for all of your efforts, and look out for that email from me today. Uni, anything else that I saw you're off mute? Okay, cool. Awesome. All right, well, we will wrap up. Thanks all for bearing with us through all of the technical difficulties. And we will see you at the next subcommittee meeting, which is on supplemental environmental projects. That's taking place on Tuesday, Tuesday of next week at 8 a.m. I know this is bright and early, but hopefully folks will continue to attend. So we'll send out more information regarding that subcommittee in just a couple days. Thanks all.